Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing an overall guide for new players to Total War Warhammer 2. We're going to be looking at the first turn of a High Elf campaign, and I'm just going to be explaining how all of the game mechanics work, and the things that you should be thinking about, particularly early in the game as you start your first couple of campaigns. So let's go ahead and get in here. We'll do Vortex. Now, I'm assuming no mods here and no DLC, no previous Warhammer 1 content or anything like that. So we're not going to do Mortal Empires. We're going to do Vortex campaign.
Preserve this world.
And special thanks to Lucas for the generous donation for this guide. If you have an idea for a guide that you would like to see for either Total War Warhammer or even for League of Legends, just email me at thestrategyprofessor@gmail.com. It's all one word, the Strategy Professor. Okay. Now, as you can see, there are quite a few different factions to choose from, although remember that Vampire Coast and Tomb Kings are going to be DLC, so you have to keep that in mind. Alright, so when you're assessing like which lord and where to start, you want to look at their faction effects, and you also want to look at the lord effects. Now, faction effects means that every single lord in your whole faction, regardless of whenever you hire them, they're going to have these benefits. And all of your buildings and all that stuff, everything in your faction is going to have that benefit. The Lord effect means that only this specific legendary Lord is going to have this effect. So for faction effects for the Elves, we've got plus 20 Diplomacy, which is really nice, particularly with Elves. There are lots of confederations you can make. We'll talk about that when we get in there. That's going to make your life a whole lot easier. Construction time for Shrine of Cain. That's okay. We'll see that building. That's going to help you make some military stuff. Now, -1 turn for recruitment and cavalry time. That is huge. That means that you're not going to have to sit around and recruit as much, and that ends up being a lot of gold, because if you have like a 5,000 gold army, has to sit around for 2 turns, that's 10,000 total gold in order for you to recruit a 2-turn unit. Versus if you only have to do that in 1 turn, it saves you 5,000 gold, so you don't have to sit there. It also allows you to keep momentum on the map a lot better, so you can keep pushing forward, keep attacking, you know, keep doing something productive with your army, rather than just sitting around. So -1 turn is really, really good for the high tier units once we start getting into Sword Masters of Hoeth. You know, once we start getting into those tier 3 cavalry, the Dragon Knights, that's really, really good. It's one of the more powerful things you can get in the game is recruitment duration reduction. This is the other really powerful thing in the game, which is upkeep reduction. So a lot of the game is going to come down to money management, and you're going to want to get the most efficient army that you possibly can, the cheapest, most powerful army that you can afford to win battles with, right? Because that's going to free up more of your money to go do something else, like build more buildings and an expansion, get a second army to gain even more territory. So really, it is all about money management, particularly as you start progressing up to the higher difficulty levels. You're going to get extra penalties when you hire more lords. Just everything starts getting a lot more expensive. You're going to have to get more public order buildings, all that kind of stuff. But the fact that he gives 50% reduction on a lot of the early game units, the Spearmen, Archers, and Silverhelms, is really, really powerful. You got to think about it this way, too, that a lot of your armies... now, this is only going to apply to him. This isn't faction-wide. But a lot of your armies, you're going to want to just have kind of your grunt infantry there, right? You're still always going to want some of those in most armies because they're really cheap. And this makes them even cheaper. So then you can spend your money on more elite units later on. You just need something just to hold the masses back, just to have a defensive line, and then you have your powerhouse units that come through and clean everything up. It's a good strategy for most factions. And then you get +3 recruit rank for the Lothern Sea Guard, which are pretty good. Now, notably, the Sea Guard are not included in the upkeep reduction, so now you've kind of got some tension. Do you want the more elite units here with extra chevrons, which we'll talk about once we get in there? It basically gives them extra stats. Or do you want the reduction? So we'll talk about when and why you might want those different things. Now, as far as elves themselves, they have intrigue at court, which we'll talk about, espionage, and then martial prowess is a stat buff that you get for things. These are where you'll find your starting units that you get. Pretty good Flamespire Phoenix and Eagleclaw Catapult. Not that amazing, but it's okay. You know, he makes up for this, though, by starting in one of the best locations in the whole game. It's a fairly secure location with one clear enemy that all of your allies around also hate. So that's going to help you out a lot with diplomacy. So he doesn't get any fantastically cool units, you know, to start with, because he has such a fantastic location and because he has really good faction effects, lord effects, starts with a great town, and he's got some really good legendary quests that he can do as well. Now, other high elves you could consider.
No limit to my power.
Teclis is going to be a bit harder. You do get some extra diplomacy, which is nice. You get +5 ranks for mages. You're probably not going to get a ton of mages, at most like 1 per army, so it's pretty decent. You do get some more elite units with him. You get Sword Masters of Hoeth, which are some of the best infantry in the game. You get the Frostheart Phoenix, which is a very strong support unit. But he starts at a much more perilous location. He starts in the jungles of Lustria. And that's going to make his life a lot harder because he's going to be surrounded by hostiles, and public order is going to be much more of a deal in that location than Tyrion's starting position. So he's going to be harder start position, but he's a cool lord. He requires really good sort of micromanagement decision making with his spells. So he's a bit more advanced, but he could be a cool unit as well. Alariel, it says that she's hard. I really don't think she's that difficult to start with. She is a spellcaster like Teclis, but she does start on Ulthuan, that big island surrounded by friends, for the most part, with 1 clear enemy. She can get some really good defensive units early on. These Treekin are going to be very, very strong frontline units. And she has really powerful magic herself, particularly because she has life magic, which we'll talk about when we go in there, which is the strongest magic in the game, I think, or certainly in many situations, it's going to be the strongest. So she's pretty cool. She gets bonuses if high elves hold all of Ulthuan. So that's really nice. And then she gets, when she walks around different regions, she gives them some bonuses. When Chaos gets stronger, she gets weaker. She's going to be very powerful most of the time. She's not a fighter, but she's a caster, and she has a really good location. So I think she's great. Now, you can pick her up through Confederation eventually as well, even if you play Tyrion. And vice versa. If you play her, you can pick up Tyrion. So I think Tyrion's start position is going to be a little bit better, but hers is still going to be strong.
We are the legacy.
And then Alethanar is a pretty tough position, kind of like Teclis. Now, he's an archer lord. He's not going to be... He's okay. He's not that amazing in combat. I really don't like the ranged lords that much. It just... For some reason, they just don't put up the numbers like a lot of other lords out there. Now, he gets 50% off Shadow Walker units, which are pretty good, but realistically... these are a lot better, the Sisters of Avalorn, that you can get down the line, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. So it's like this kind of second-rate,
we shall dance in the shadows,
you know, type of champion. It's a versatile champion. It's okay, but he gets a big discount on those, which they're all right. I mean, you'll want to get him because he gets so many bonuses for him and stuff when you get into his skills, but they're all right. Now, he does have an ambush mechanic as well, so whenever he attacks, kind of like the Skaven get, then he gets to ambush as well. So that's a really fun mechanic. It's cool. You get certain targets marked for death. You get rewards if you kill him. So he's kind of like a bounty hunter. He's pretty fun. He has some global recruitment reduction, which is nice. All of his armies get extra campaign movement. So he's pretty cool, but he is going to be a little bit more advanced. You're going to have to micro a lot better with these Shadow Walkers. He himself, you're going to have to micro better because he's kind of on the weak side. You really need a kite and, you know, move and attack with him. So it's going to be a bit tougher of a campaign, but it can be pretty fun. So let's go ahead and get in here with Tyrion. I think Tyrion's the best starting one. I think he's easily the most powerful one in terms of his faction effects and location. Okay, I'm going to skip the cinematic. Y'all can watch it. But we'll try to make this guide as succinct as we can. It's already going to be a really long guide because I'm going to try to cover as much as I can. Really want to give Lucas some value for his generous donation here. So now I'm going to try to talk about things that apply to all factions as well. Obviously, each faction is going to have a bit more nuance to them in terms of like which types of stats are important, which types of strategies they're going to use. But I'll try as much as possible to talk about stuff that is relevant for all of the other factions. But we'll also include some stuff specifically for High Elves and Tyrion that are good strategies.
Fellow Azure.
Okay. So it tells you how they play here, and of course we're going to be going into all of this. So number one thing, I get asked this all the time. If you like the nameplates, which I have here, which I think are really handy, just to kind of know which lord it is and where the hostile lords are. You can see the red versus like green lords and things like that. You just scroll out with your mouse wheel. That's what I'm doing right now. Scroll out a little bit until you get to this over here. These are overlays. And just down here in the bottom right, just click on character names. And that will show you the character names of everyone in view. That also makes sure that when you're looking at the big map like this, and you scroll in a little bit, you can see all the character names. So if there's someone that you didn't notice, maybe that was just like a hostile person who is creeping in, one extra army just right on the edge of the visibility here, maybe you wouldn't see them if you're like down here focusing on what you're doing. Maybe you wouldn't see that lord that just like barely poked his head in over here. But if you scroll out a little bit, you will see him. So that's really handy. Oh, we want to put that back on. I took it off, but there we go.
Shield against the darkness.
And okay, so you want to assess your situation as you are sort of going around and figuring out whichever faction you're playing. Every faction kind of has their early game priorities and things they need to be accomplishing. Now, when you're playing the standard Warhammer 2 Vortex campaign, your goal is to get as much of this resource, these wave fragment things. Everybody's going to have the same kind of resource. It's just called a different thing. And there are different ways you can do this. You can complete missions, but one of the most important things you can do is gather certain territories where you can mine some of this every turn. You can build a building that will basically mine it. Now, I don't know where all of them are for the High Elves. I know there is one that's at Val's Anvil. I think you can tell because it'll have this like blue stuff going on if you're kind of close. Now, I'm not sure if allies, like military allies, will give you their fragments or not. I don't remember that mechanic. It's been a while since I played the Vortex, but I know that definitely if you take it through military might, you can get it. So as you progress the campaign, just see if you get to military ally, see if it's giving you those fragments or not. I assume there's probably one other one up here. Usually there's 2 per region that are kind of accessible. But once again, I don't know exactly where that's going to be. So your early mission, excuse me, your early mission is going to be to try to unify Ulthuan. So you want to try to get to military allies with everyone here and then get a confederation with them. We'll talk about that in just a second when we talk about diplomacy. But you want to wipe out the Dark Elves on the southern part of the island. Make friends with everyone else that you can who's around. And then work your way to the north. See if you can get a confederation, particularly with Alariel. Early on, she'll help you secure the top side of the island. It'll give you another really good lord you can use, legendary lord. It'll give you access to the Sword of Cain if you want to use that down the line, which can be really powerful. And I suspect there will be one more wave fragment area over there. So you should have 2 wave fragment areas at least somewhere on the island. And that's going to be handy. And then after that, once you secure this area kind of in the mid-game, see if you can send out a couple of scouts down here and spot Teclis. He starts, I believe in Vortex campaign, he actually starts way over here. In Mortal Empires, he starts over here. But he's going to be way on this side of the island. Just send out like one of your Lore Masters of Hoeth or, you know, just one of your other heroes down here. Try to see if you can just run through and get vision of him, and then see if you can confederate with him eventually. That'll be, you know, kind of in the mid to late game. See if you can confederate with him. He should have a little bit of territory down here, and I know that there is a, yeah, there's one as well. So it does kind of glow here where you can see the wave fragment location. So there will be a couple of wave fragment locations down here. I know the Skaven hold a couple through here as well. So that'll give you access to some more. And then Aletha Nar, I believe, starts over here. We can see there's another wave fragment location over here. So if you can get a confederation with him, that's great as well. So it's really nice with the elves that they all play nice with each other for the most part. It's very easy to confederate with them. So if you get this island and then you get, you befriend Aletha Nar and Teclis and just grab their nearby resource nodes, then that should put you ahead of the race for most other people in the game. So usually you want to control at least 4 of those resource nodes and continually like complete these missions in order to advance past the other factions. Now, as you get close to these checkpoints, it gives you some story stuff. You'll see some cutscenes that are pretty cool. And then there will be some spawns of chaos that will show up and will try to go towards the place where you're channeling, which most of the time should be Lothern. It's usually your faction capital. And so you need to have an army there ready and waiting. And then if you hang out close to the faction capital, they will get close enough to attack it, and you can use the garrison to help you out. So that's really handy. So you'll want to build up like a garrison building we'll show here in a second. That'll give you a lot of extra units to where you can attack them. Having skills like Lightning Strike also help a ton when the time comes. And it becomes increasingly difficult as well with each one of these. And the enemy is also going to be racing towards these. You can send some interference armies if you're super rich to try to go like shut them down, which can be decent. You know, if you're rich, it'll send extra elf armies that you can't control, plus some chaos armies to go try to knock out their town that's channeling. So that's the major win condition of the game. You want to control these resources. You want to get towns that have them, and usually through Confederation, you can get access to more of them as the game goes along. So let's go ahead and look at diplomacy here real quick, since I've talked about it so much with Confederation. So you'll see over here, there's a point system for the diplomacy. And there's sort of a shading system as well. Now you can see some factions will have an aversion to you, which means that they don't particularly like you to start with, although you can overcome that. And some people will like you. So the affinity, that plus 30 there, is something that, or you get plus 20 for ruler's tolerance to Lothern. That's his racial trait. So he gets plus 20 with all elves, which makes dealing with them a lot easier. And then you get affinity. Sometimes some elves will have affinity towards you. Sometimes they'll have this aversion. I think that's random for most elves. There are a couple of factions where certain people will naturally like you or naturally not like you every time. But a lot of them is just kind of random, whether you get aversion or tolerance. Okay. Now, Cult of Excess is who you're at war with. So you can see the little war symbol here. If it's gray, that means there's no way you can ever get peace with them or negotiate with them. You're just going to have to kill them. So those are the Dark Elves that are down near the bottom. And then the Rogue armies are primarily for Vampire Coast. I'm not sure what you get if you go kill them. You might get some missions to get them eventually. Usually they just kind of float around in the sea, and they don't do anything to your land towns. Now, if you go at sea, they might attack you occasionally. I'm not really sure. It does say aggressive. So just be careful if you try to traverse the sea and, you know, those guys are sitting around. So if we click on diplomacy here, Ygress is up here.
Well-chosen words and fine wine are the marks of civilization.
So they like us right now. If you click on this, it'll tell you what all is available. Non-aggression means that you're agreeing with this faction that you're not going to attack each other. So you can't break, or you should not try to break a non-aggression pact unless it's been 10 turns. Since you've made the pact, and then you have to wait in addition, I think it's 10 turns since you made the pact, but you have to wait 10 turns after you end an aggression pact. So you can do break non-aggression pact, and then you have to wait 10 turns until you can attack them. If you attack them before that 10-turn window, you can do it, but it's going to hurt your reliability a lot, which means that it's going to be difficult to do diplomacy with other people. They're not going to want to trade with you. They're not going to want to sign treaties with you because you've broken your treaties with other people. It makes sense, right? They're also much more likely to go to war with you. So if they see you as someone who's very treacherous and backstabbing, then a lot of people will want to go to war with you. It doesn't mean that everybody's automatically going to break all of their treaties and go to war with you if you break a treaty with somebody, but it just means it's more likely that if someone's kind of on, just kind of neutral or like on the edge, whether they like you or not, they're definitely not going to like you for a while. Now, this does recover over time. There's not a specific, you know, measurement for that. It depends on how big your treasury is, or your treachery is, you know. Attacking someone when you have a non-aggression with them is pretty bad, but attacking someone that's like your military ally or something like that is much, much worse. So it just depends. So just use some common sense. If you're doing stuff that seems treacherous or bad, people aren't going to like it, and you're going to have to work around that. So you can get the non-aggression here. If you click on this, it'll tell you the likelihood of success is moderate. That's what the yellow also means when you see this. Red means it's not happening. You're not going to be able to make that happen. But if it's moderate, you click on it, Sometimes you can add extra things on there. It makes it a little more complicated if you do that. If you do a trade agreement, then that means that you're going to be trading goods. You always get a little bit of gold for a trade agreement. It does help you diplomatically. And once you start building buildings that have some sort of resource node in them, so I don't think we have any here, but like this one, for instance, has salt. So we can see the little icon here. If we get that, then we can trade salt with people. And if you click on this treasury icon up here, we don't have anything we can trade right now, but you can go in and see. I think salt is like 10 gold per unit, and then once you create the salt mine, you'll get like 20 to start with, and then if you upgrade it, you can get even more salt. Okay, let's see if I can get a trade agreement with them real quick, just so I can show you what that's all about.
You called. I will hear your petition and consider it very well.
Okay, cool. Now, the elves also, because of their espionage thing, their racial trait or whatever, I don't know if it's going to say it. Doesn't say it there, but basically you get vision of people that you have trade agreements with. So you can see what's going on in their territory. So the elves are highly, highly encouraged to try to get trade agreements with people. Right? So typically you have to be military allied before you can get vision of everything. But with the elves, you get extra stuff with that. And I think you're allowed to do sort of the influence stuff, which we'll show here in a second, once you have trade agreements with people. So we've got a trade agreement with them. A lot of times people won't do more than one treaty in a turn.
Deeds will be watched with interest.
But sometimes they will. So if we look at this here, trade. So if we look at like salt, which is nearby, it's 12 per. So if you get 20 units of it, you get 240 gold per turn, which is really nice. So being able to trade is great. If you have a sea trade route, you're going to get more out of it. More of this kind of like baseline value you're going to get out of it rather than if you have a land-based trade system. So if you have a port, Lothern is a port, then you're able to trade with, for a pretty large range, with anyone else that also has a port. Okay. So if we go over here again, I'm not sure if they're going to go for this, but they might. One thing you can do, especially if something is green, he doesn't have anything that's green, but you can demand payments as well. And sometimes they'll give you just a little bit of gold, like 300 gold. Okay, he's wanting a defensive alliance. We'll go ahead and take that.
If you wish.
Now, I will say, you want to be careful with some of these alliances. You can see right now their total attitude, we're going from 73 points to 114. As the points go up, they're more likely to do higher and higher level stuff. So as points go up, they're more likely to do military alliances, and eventually Confederation. Confederation is the highest
Lord
order.
Of the Phoenix
so
Court. Welcome.
They won't do that for a while typically, but if you get really high ratings with them, then eventually if you confederate, then that means that you gain all of their territory and you gain all of their lords that they have. You gain all of their buildings, everything. Now, that does hurt your diplomacy with the other elves for like 5 turns or so they'll be a little mad that you confederated with somebody else. And it does hurt your public order a little bit. I don't remember how much it does that in the baseline game of Warhammer 2. It used to be, I think, like 5 to 8 public order per turn. That might change depending on your difficulty level, but you'll get some kind of civil unrest because of that as you're integrating this new group with your own. But usually it's something that's very manageable and pretty straightforward. So it's a big, big deal to confederate. Usually, if you can confederate with someone, that's way more powerful than conquering them through the military because you get all of their buildings intact. You don't have to, attack their towns. You get all of their lords. So sometimes you can get some really high-level lords. And that's how you get the other legendary lords, right? So that's how you can get Alariel. That's how you can get Teclis. And obviously, you want them. They're really strong, and they're always immortal. The other legendary lords. That means if they die in combat, then you get them back after 5 turns, which obviously is a very strong trait. If it's a normal lord, you have to get a skill at level 20 that makes them immortal. Okay, so confederations, whenever you're playing a friendly faction, like the High Elves, or like, trying to think of what else, like the Lizardmen to an extent, then it's easier to get confederations with other people. If you're playing like an evil faction like Dark Elves or Skaven, sometimes it's harder to get confederations. And it's harder to get trade agreements and do diplomacy because people don't like you because you're evil. And there just aren't as many factions of things like Skaven, for example. There aren't many. There are only 2, major factions of Skaven. So I guess there are 3. There's Tretch. They added Tretch in there. But anyways, that's definitely a specialty of the High Elves is diplomacy. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. Some ways that you can get better diplomacy with people as well. You can actually give them gifts if you want to. Now, this can get a little cheesy. You can decide how far you want to go with this. I think it's appropriate sometimes, and you can see how much it is. The game's pretty fairly balanced to where if you throw a little gold at them, we'll go ahead and do this just so I can show you like what it does. But if you offer a payment,
most astute,
they'll take it, and then you can see over here gifts given. It gives you 30 extra diplomacy, or 29, which kind of starts to decay over time. Now, I don't know if there's an upper limit of that if you keep stacking that all together, because I try not to abuse that too much. But that is really nice if you're just trying to gain a little bit of an edge with some people. Just push them into Confederation territory a little bit faster. You can give them some money. The more the faction likes you, the more, or the cheaper it's going to be to give them gifts. So if we look at Calidor here, for example, they don't like us very much. They don't want non-aggressions, all that stuff. So if we look at payments, we could do an offer payment. That's actually pretty cheap considering how much they hate us. I think if you do medium gift, I believe we already had gifts with those other people, and that's why it looked weird. We can go ahead and do one in, well, let's not do Calendor just because we're probably going to fight them. I mean, not that I'm going to play this campaign out or anything.
Listening.
Which is technically someone that we might want to sweet talk a little bit. Might be Illyrian or something like that, for example. So, well, who is...
Give the word.
Safari controls this very important town over here, so you're trying to pick, like, who your allies are. They have this tower over here, this mage tower thing, which you wouldn't know that unless you played through a little bit more. But if there's, like, these special things, it's like a strategic location of special importance. You'll kind of learn where these are. You particularly want those towns because they're going to have special buildings that are really nice for you. So, these are also neighbors with Yvres, so it'd be nice to have everyone really friendly on the right side over here. So we'll try to, let's say we want to play nice with them.
What business have you with the Asser,
you know, we could do some
Orthwag?
gifts with them. 432. So it's all relatively cheap. Yeah, and it's only 10 gifts. So we had already given gifts over to these before the campaign even started. That's just part of the lore, is they're already kind of like on our side a little bit. So for a certain price, for 400, you know, you can get up to 10 influence with them. If you give a bigger gift, it'll give you 30, and then I think the huge gift is like 50, and it gets like exponentially more expensive. Okay, so that's diplomacy. If you're fighting a common enemy, so let's say that these guys are fighting the Pirates of Sartosa, right, Yvres, which we can see over here, who they're trading with, who they're fighting. If I declare war on Pirates of Sartosa and start fighting them, they're going to like that. So the more you kill their enemies, you get extra bonus points with them. So, like, for example, war with the Cult of Excess. They aren't actually at war with the Cult of Excess right now, but they don't like them. And so as I start killing Cult of Excess, then I'm going to gain more and more diplomacy with them. Similarly, if you're friends with their friends, a lot of times that helps out a little bit too, right? So if they're allies with, you know, if they were allies with Ilariel or something like that, then if I'm friends with them and if I'm friends with Ilariel, that's going to help my diplomacy with both factions. So if you're enemies with their enemies, they like that. If you're friends with their friends, they also like that. The enemies of enemies is very, very powerful. If you start killing, slaughtering all the people they hate, then you get some huge bonuses really quickly. You can also potentially drag them into wars, or if they join your wars or whatever, then that'll give a lot of bonus points too. So for example, if I'm trying to get really good diplomacy with them, and I know that maybe they aren't too fond of the Skaven or something like that, right? Then I could ask them, how much money do you want to join the war against the Skaven, or what would you like for that diplomatically? And they might say, well, we want 400 gold or something like that. And so you say, okay, I'll pay it. and then they'll go to war with me. Or if we're military allies, if you get to the point of military allies, and then you just declare war on someone like the Skaven, they have to follow you into war or break that treaty, and they're probably going to follow you. The elves are pretty trustworthy for the most part, the high elves. So if you get military alliance with people, you can just start declaring wars with other like enemies out there, and that'll give you even more diplomacy. It'll skyrocket your diplomacy, and that'll eventually lead to a confederation potentially. So those are all things to consider there. Now on the flip side, be very careful if you start doing diplomacy with people that may not like each other, that might declare war, because that could force you to be treacherous. So for example, let's say that I was trying to be friends with these guys, Yvres and Pirates of Sartosa. If they weren't at war with each other, let's say for example, but they hate each other, then I get a defensive alliance with these guys, and I get a defensive alliance with Pirates of Sartosa. If one of them declares war on the other one, I have to follow them into war, which is going to make me break my defensive alliance with the one faction, or I have to break my alliance with the other group and not go into war. So if you start getting all these military alliances and defensive alliances, and those people that you're allied with go to war with each other, you're going to have to pick a side, and you're going to have to break a treaty one way or another. So if you're military allies with two people that go to war with each other, you're breaking a treaty. So just be very, very careful. And I would say, pick your allies with care, okay? Don't just befriend everybody. And if you're playing high elves, you need to favor the elves, okay? People that are high elves, those are your friends. People that you can confederate with are usually going to be your highest priority target. So even if Sartosa is trying to be really chill with us, trying to buddy up with us, don't go along with Sartosa, because that's just going to make everyone mad, and that's going to force you to break some treaties. So that's just how it goes sometimes. So be very, very careful which people you're picking as friends and who you're choosing as enemies. Okay. Also, for example, like you wouldn't probably want to try to pick Alariel as an enemy, because a lot of people are going to love her up here. She's going to have a lot of allies. She's going to have a lot of friends. So, not that you would want to try to do that, but that's something to just be careful of. I think that's pretty much it as far as diplomacy goes. We talked about trading, this different stuff, some of the tricks you can get. Now, if people do like you,
what brings you to the
I don't know if they're going to do this, but
wise indeed.
yeah, that's one thing you can do, especially early on. If you have green diplomacy with people, you can ask every 10 turns or so, just say, hey, can you give me 300 gold? They'll say sure.
What would you have
now, usually that's only if they're green.
Never.
They'll just give you free gold every 10 turns.
You address
but
the Asur of Ulthuan. I think this unwise.
Lady of Ulthuan.
And you want to check back with them every now and then. We do have a non-aggression with them already, so we kind of want to stick with that.
What would you have the Asur do?
Protector, a dignified visitor. Such a rare. I cannot do this.
Okay. So anyways, you can go through and do more diplomacy if you want. Now, the influence system here is you gain influence. There's a bunch of different mechanics. Usually it's through different quests that you can gain influence. There are different buildings. There are certain heroes you can get with skills that give you influence. So as you get influence, you can change around how different factions feel about other factions. So you can look at your faction, and let's say that I really wanted Yvres, for example. I wanted to increase relations with them. Right, so I could pay 5 influence and, upgrade that. Now, I don't remember how much it is, how much it does push that up, but it does push it up a little bit. So you can use that influence to move up relations, but remember, you can also use plain gold to do that as well by buying their favor. And influence is a really, really powerful mechanic, because if we go into the recruit lords section, which is where you can recruit extra lords, your lords are usually pretty terrible, the baseline lords, unless you use influence. So right here, this one costs 60 influence. So you would need 60 influence in addition to these other things to hire this lord. And they get cool things like missile resistance, melee defense for everybody in the army, minus 20% upkeep for dragon units, minus 1 recruitment duration for dragons, so that's huge. That's really good. Extra range and missile damage, that's terrible on just her for how much influence you're paying for it. Then there are some kind of mid-range ones. So, Alistar, the White Lion. This is a really good sort of special lord. He's not officially a legendary lord, but he's a really strong companion you can get. You get upkeep reduction on White Lions, which are a good mid-range unit we'll talk about here in a little bit. But he only costs 30 to pick up. And then some of these cost 15, and they're okay. Now, that upkeep reduction for Archer, Spearmen, all that crap, that's a really, really good one for 15. Remember, upkeep reduction is of paramount value. So yeah, you can get some good stuff. I would try to save up for some of these 60 units if you can, eventually. You can also get, I think you can get your mages and things like that. It's not going to show us because we don't have mage buildings, but all of your heroes, you can also get super upgraded ones for like 30 influence. So I would highly recommend saving your influence a lot of times in order to get really nice mages and really nice lords. Now, keep in mind, if you're playing your cards right, you should be able to confederate with some other legendary lords. So you might want to time, when you want to get your second army around when you're going to be able to get one of those confederations. So going for a L'Oreal, kind of in the mid game, see if you can pick her up by like maybe turn 40 or 50. Through the diplomacy I talked about, fighting her enemies, befriending her friends, throwing her a little gold, getting trade agreements, all that stuff. Sweeten her up a little bit, see if you can confederate with her, and then you don't have to spend influence or money on extra lords, because you're going to have her. And she might even come with some more lords as well. She might have a second lord that you could pick up for free. So, you know, I would say that be aware of that and probably use your influence on your mages are a top priority, and maybe some of your other heroes as well. But yeah, be very, very careful using this intrigue at court. It can work. It can be useful in a pinch if you're like really close to like getting them to that confederation. If they're like yellow or something and they're just not quite doing it, then you could use that to speed up the process a little bit. But you know, just be aware that you do want to save your influence for other stuff as well. Okay, let's go ahead and now that we've talked about sort of diplomacy, how all that works, your early game sort of strategy should be to grab this area. I don't remember if I said that before or not, because this is going to have one of your early resource sites. It also has a really good sort of legendary building there with Val's Anvil. You get some resources over here. It's a faction that usually is pretty hostile to you no matter what. Kalidor usually doesn't like the other elves that much. So they're a really good faction to kill. So what you would do early on is just beat up these dark elves and then work your way over here and try to get this. So you would secure Lothern, Kalidor, and Straits of Lothern. And then also see if you can get this Etain, Shrine of Assyrian. So that would give you... Where are these things? Yes, that's... Okay, so that would give you 1, 2, 3 provinces to start with. And then you can hopefully start maybe confederating or befriending other people around here, and then work your way up north. It's kind of your early strategy to go with. Okay, let's look at units here for a little bit and just kind of talk about which units are strong, why they're strong, and which kinds of strategies you might want to use with these units. This is going to be a pretty long video. It's probably going to be like an hour to an hour and a half, but I just wanted to include everything since, you know, Lucas said he was brand new and really wanted to know all about the game. This might have been better suited to break up into like 3 or 4 different videos, but whatever. We'll try to throw it all in here for you. So you start with a good landmark building, which are usually going to be this kind of pinkish purplish color. Those are very strong buildings, and they're unique to that specific location. So you can't get this stuff in other locations. So, and usually that means if you can get it, you want to get those buildings because they're very strong. So like this one gives a lot of income, extra tradable resources, and gives you +1 recruit rank for Lothern Seaguard. Now remember, he naturally gets +3 for all Lothern Seaguard as well. Every rank that you get in a unit, I don't think we have any chevrons here, but every rank that you give just gives a little bit better fighting capability. So it'll give you just like a little bit more melee attack, a little bit more melee defense, a little bit more leadership typically. I think it gives you a little bit better accuracy with your archers. And that's usually it. The big ones are like melee attack, melee defense, and leadership are the big ones. Your armor is not typically affected. Your speed's not typically affected. Your weapon strength's not affected. And I don't think it affects your charge bonus. So the big thing is just leadership, melee attack, and defense. But those are very strong qualities. So you want as many chevrons as possible. So in other words, you know, if you start off with Lothern Seaguard at rank 6 or something like that, they're going to have a lot more melee attack. Like they might have something like, you know, like 28 or 27 melee attack and 45 melee defense instead of these numbers here. So what do these numbers mean? Let's talk about this here really quickly because I don't think this gets explained very well in the game. Armor is basically how you stop standard physical damage in the game. Okay, so what armor does is you do whatever the armor number is divided by 2, and that's how much damage you take in the game. Now, this has changed over time in Warhammer, but I think this is the current iteration of it. So, like, for example, if I have 15 armor here, that's going to block 7.5% physical damage that's non-armor piercing. We'll talk about armor piercing damage in a second. Just standard damage is going to get blocked. And so things that have a lot of armor, like these Dragon Princes have 110 armor, that means that they're going to take 55% less damage because they have 110 armor. Now that applies to melee attacks and that applies to physical damage out there. So physical damage from like archers. I don't think most spells do physical damage, but it's just things like basically archers and melee combatants. Okay, so that's the damage reduction there. Okay, so that's armor. So armor can be impacted by armor penetration. So let's look here, for example. If a unit has a lot of armor penetration, it'll have this little icon here. Okay, so if we look at this, and this is for every unit, it'll tell you weapon damage, that's the standard damage that's blocked by armor, and then armor penetration, armor piercing damage is 25. That means if they're attacking those Dragon Princes, that 25 damage is going to go through no matter what, through that armor, right? It does not get reduced at all. And then the extra 9 damage is going to get reduced by 55%. So you're going to deal like 4 damage off of your base weapon damage, then 25 off your armor piercing. So it's going to be a total of like 29 damage. Versus if this was all standardized damage with no armor piercing against those Dragon Princes, you would have 34 damage reduced by 55%. Is going to be somewhere around 17 damage. So if there was no armor piercing here, you would be doing 17 damage, versus with this amount of armor piercing, you're doing 29. So armor piercing damage is tremendously valuable, particularly against very high armor targets. Okay. Now one other thing. Okay. So one thing to note here that I wanted to mention is physical resist is different than armor. So what physical resist does is this blocks all physical damage coming in, regardless of whether or not it's armor piercing damage. Okay, so that 20% there, if someone was doing, 30 damage, for example, this would block 6 of that, right? It'd block 20%. That's in addition to the armor. So if someone was trying to do, and I believe that stacks multiplicatively. Not 100% about that stacking now that I think about it, but I believe it would stack multiplicatively. So what I mean by that is, let's say something's trying to do 50 damage to you. You're getting it reduced by, or let's just say something's doing 100 damage to you, just for easier math. You're getting it reduced by 55%, right? So then it's only going to do 45 physical damage to you after armor. That 45 physical damage that's going to come through would then get reduced by an additional 20% right here. So then you would get 1/5 off again, so that would reduce it by 45. 1/5 is 9, so you'd go down by 9. It would be 36 damage. So a standard enemy that's trying to attack you with something that's ranged that does physical damage with no armor piercing would only do a total of 36 out of their 100 damage. So that makes them very, very resilient. Okay, so you might say, well, what's the difference? Why do they have this? Okay, the big difference is this is good against armor penetration. Okay, so even if someone has 100 armor penetration, and it would typically go through, all of that armor there, it's still going to get reduced by 20%. Okay, so even if it does 100 armor piercing damage, it would still only do 80 damage because that would be reduced by 20%. But this physical resistance does not work against magical attacks. So if something has a magical attack, like the Sisters of Avalorn here. You'll see this little, like, magic-looking icon. It goes through all physical resistance. So even if they have that 20% physical resist, it's not going to do anything against the magical attack. However, armor does block it, because this does not count as the magical property of this attack does not count as armor piercing. They do have armor piercing as a separate trait. If we look at their damage here, right, so they do have 18, they do have a lot of armor piercing, but that's just incidental. There are some people who do magical attacks that don't have a lot of armor piercing damage. Okay, but basically armor piercing damage counters armor. Magical attacks counter physical resist. Okay, that's the best way to think about it. So yeah, that's how that works. Then there's one other property to kind of this resistance game as well, which is going to be a shield. All right, so if something has a shield here, then it's going to block small arms missile fire. That's basically anything that's not artillery or like really big, hard-hitting things. So basically archers and stuff like that is going to get blocked. So that means that this unit is going to block 35% of small arm fire. If it blocks one of those arrows, the arrow does 0 damage, okay? So that makes these units extremely resistant, these Dragon Princes, because they have high armor, and they have shields, and they have physical resist. So if, like, an archer is just normally trying to shoot at this, and it's trying to do 100 non-piercing damage, 35% of that is going to end up getting blocked. Okay, so already we're going to be down to 65% of whatever the damage is, and then 55% of that is going to get blocked. So that's going to take it down to, you know, whatever, that, like 32, and then 20% of that is going to get blocked. So that's going to take it down to like 25. So out of the total, you know, 100 damage, they're only doing 25 after everything's all said and done. So that's huge. And that's a bronze shield. There are some shields that are even bigger. So if you look at these have silver shields, which blocks 55% of small arm fire. So this is very, very important when we're thinking about archers firing on other archers. If these guys with this silver shield, for example, are firing on these normal archers, they're going to have a massive advantage because they're blocking 55% of the arrows that are coming in. And they also have bigger armor. So they're just going to carve right through these guys because these guys don't have any shields, they don't have any armor, and they have very low armor, and they have no physical resist, whereas these guys have shields and higher armor. So that's how the armor trait works. There are some characters and things that are magical resistant as well, so sometimes magical attacks aren't an amazing thing. Like dwarves, for example, there aren't many in the High Elf army, I don't think, that are magical resistant. There's missile resistance, which I'll show you here as well, but like the dwarves, for example, I believe get 25% magical resist at all times. So these firing on dwarves, the damage would get reduced by 25% because they're resistant to magic. Even though it's an attack, it's not a spell, it's still a magical attack, and so it's going to get reduced. Now, one other trait that I just mentioned here is there's also missile resistance. So that means that this champion is going to block any sort of missile damage, whether it's magical damage, physical damage, anything, artillery damage, anything that's going to be missile resist is going to be blocked by 25%. So in theory, something could have missile resist, physical resist, armor, and shields, and it would just basically be immune to ranged attacks for the most part. So that's a really interesting quality there. You will also see sometimes things will have a ward save. They don't have that as much here. I don't know if any units have that in the baseline game. Some mods have that more than others. That's a very rare quality where it basically is like physical resist and magical resist all rolled into one. Let me see if he has any skills that have that over here. I don't know if he's going to have that or not. Oh, there it is. Okay, so you see ward save there, right? The 10% ward save. That basically means it's going to block 10% of magical damage and physical damage, and that's separate from the physical resistance there. And those, I believe those stack additively, I think. I think. So that's going to be 20% total physical resistance because of the ward save and the physical resistance. And then it's going to have the 10% magical resistance because of the ward save there. So ward save is obviously ridiculously strong for those reasons. Now there's also a trait, a final trait here that's flaming attacks that these guys have. So there are certain units, particularly units that regenerate, are most known for being very vulnerable to fire. Certain tree units, like those tree units I talked about with Alariel, are going to be vulnerable to fire. So that will be a little icon down here that looks like it has a little flame on it. It'll say like this unit's vulnerable to fire. Okay, and so dragons do fire damage, and so they would do extra damage to trees or to things that regenerate, like trolls, and stuff like that are going to take usually 35% extra damage from fire. So that's really good. And these Sisters of Avalorn also do flaming damage. So remember, the fire damage is not the same thing as magical attacks. Physical resist is still going to block stuff that does fire damage. So that's kind of weird, but that's how it works. And armor is still going to block stuff that does fire damage. So the only thing that's affected by that fire is if you're attacking a unit that has fire resistance or a unit that has vulnerability to fire. So a lot of things that do fire damage, like dragons, are also going to have fire resistance typically. Now these two don't, which is a little weird. But like the Flame Spire Phoenix does, because it's made of fire. It has 70% fire resistance. So it's still going to curiously take some damage from fire, even though it's made of fire. But it has very heavy resistance to it, okay? So if there's like a dragon, for example, is attacking a Flame Spire Phoenix, it's not going to do any damage hardly. So you could use this Flame Spire Phoenix to face tank some of these dragons pretty often, because they're going to block a lot of that damage. They're going to be taking 70% less damage from those things, not including what their armor would do. Right. A couple of other traits of units here, since we're just kind of talking about these traits down here. We have fear and terror. That leads into talking about leadership as well, so that's a pretty good transition. So let me start by talking about leadership. So leadership is basically how likely is a champion going to be able to stay on the battlefield versus run away. So the higher their leadership is, the less likely they are to run. Once they get to certain thresholds, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it's 30. Once they start to get to 30, then there's a chance they could run away. If they go to 0 or negative, then they're almost definitely going to run away. So things with higher leadership are really strong because they're going to stay in the fight for much longer. Now, leadership gets impacted by a lot of stuff. The more damage a unit gets, the more its leadership is going to fall. If it sees allies running away, its leadership is going to fall. If the Lord dies, its leadership is going to fall. If it's getting flanked, attacked from the back, the leadership is going to fall. If it's getting attacked from the sides, the leadership is going to fall. If it's surrounded by enemies, right? So if it's getting flanked, it's pretty bad. If it's getting directly attacked from the back, it's really bad. If it's getting shot in the back by arrows, that's an additional penalty that goes into that. And then there are certain things that can lower that even further. So if a champion or if something is getting scared, so if like this moon dragon is attacking some human archers, these guys are going to be scared of that dragon because it's a big dragon, right? And so that's going to lower their leadership overall. It doesn't say how much it lowers it, but it does add some fear to it. It might have been like 10 or 15 that fear lowers it, but it lowers it by a decent chunk. Now, an upgraded version of that is terror. So the lower leadership is, the more likely something is to be terrified of that unit. So something that's super scary can make people just run away. Even if they're not at like 0 leadership, then they can run. Now, I think that they have to be fairly low on the leadership. Like if they have full health, they're not going to just run away immediately if they see a terror unit. But I think as their leadership goes down, there's a higher probability that terror is going to kick in. So I think around that 30 number again, the leadership of 30 or so, then they're going to flee. Now, this does not mean that they're running for good. They just run for a limited amount of times. They might run for like 10 seconds or so and then be able to rally back. But basically, it's going to make it even more likely that they're going to run. Now, units that cause terror are not terrified by other units. So if they're a big, scary unit, they're not going to be scared of other big, scary units. Things that cause fear are not afraid of other fear-causing units. So, same penalty applies. Although, if something only causes fear, it can be terrored, right? So this only causes fear as an eagle. It can still be terrified of a dragon. Okay, so it's just like upgraded fear. And so leadership is really strong. Anything that buffs leadership, you want it. If you have a super like crack squad with like a bunch of them have over like 100 leadership and they're fighting a bunch of like, you know, low leadership things like Skaven that have like 40 or 50 leadership, and they all start running away, that's really powerful because that can start chain breaks. Like once one unit starts running away, that can cause other units to run away too because they get scared that their allies are dropping their stuff and running. And then once they're running away, you're getting all these free hits on them because they're turning their back to you and running, you know, and so you just get to, you know, mow them down with your swords or your arrows or whatever. That's going to cause them to take even more damage, which is going to cause even more leadership penalty, which is going to make them even more likely to keep running. And so it can be extremely powerful once you start getting some of these units to run. Now, some of the weaker factions, like that have like these like just garbage units like Skaven that are meant to be these meat shield units, they added this into the game where if those units run, it doesn't affect everybody else. You know, if just some Skaven slaves are running away, nobody's going to care. They're like, okay, they're expected to be terrible and run away. They're just meat shields. They're like zombies or something like that for the undead. It's not going to matter. But it'll have a little icon there if that's the case. The elves don't have any trash units like that. So if any of their units start running away, it's going to be very bad. So you want to keep your leadership as high as possible. So that's leadership. That's how it fits in with kind of these psychological traits here. Another quality that you'll see in some higher tier units is siege attacker. This means that you can attack a town before you ever get any sort of like battering rams or stuff to climb the walls. We're not going to get into that in this video. We're not going to be advanced enough in the campaign where that's going to matter. But typically you have to wait on a battering ram or you have to wait on a siege tower to be able to attack. However, if you have a siege attacker trait like a dragon, you can attack it on the first turn. You don't have to wait, which can be really powerful if they're trying to run their army back to reinforce the town to defend it, and you end up you know, if you had to wait for a turn, they might be able to get in there to help defend. But if you take it on that first turn without having to wait, then they may not get that reinforcing army. It could also just speed the process up, so you don't have to sit around and wait. So really nice to have a siege attacker unit. Usually it's like really high tier monsters, or if you have siege equipment, like the Eagle Claw bolt thrower, things that can attack their defense towers, then that counts as a siege attacker, so that's nice. So let's move on. Let's talk about speed. Basically, this is how fast a unit moves. I don't know what the exact like quantities are, but you can tell a difference, right? Something that's 85 is going to be moving really, really fast. The standard for most infantry is going to be something like 32, which is pretty lightly armored infantry. To heavily armored infantry will be like 30 to 32. Sometimes there are certain units that have special kinds of armor. So like these guys, I think they move about the same, about 33. These guys are heavily armored, move about 33. These guys have lighter armor, so they move about 36. So most of your standard infantry are going to be somewhere between like low to mid 30s. Higher tier cavalry, of course, are going to move a lot faster. These have 78 movement speed, so they move very, very fast, a lot faster than infantry like you would expect. Dragons move very quickly, so they have 80 movement speed, 95 movement speed there. So like your really high tier skirmisher units are going to move quickly. Like this does 84 for that chariot. Like these lightly armored horses are going to move 90. The more heavily armored horses are going to move about 78. There are some like super heavily armored horses that'll move like, 60 to 80. Some monsters, I don't think they have anything that fits into that. They're like some kind of like bigger ground monsters like trolls or trying to think of like rat ogres and things like that, might move somewhere between like 50 to 60. There are some kinds of infantry that are known for moving a bit faster. So like some elf infantry and stuff like that might move about 40. I believe Black Ark Corsairs for the Dark Elves move somewhere around 40. So, just keep an eye on that. You can just expect that things that seem like they should move fast, this thing moves 120. Jesus, I didn't realize it was that fast. that moves 100s. This moves like super fast. Things that you would expect to move fast, like lightly armored horses, move quick. Dragons move quick. Heavily armored infantry units move a lot slower. So that's just pretty self-explanatory, but there's a stat for you there. Okay, melee attack. Now, melee attack is intricately tied with melee defense. So this only applies to hand-to-hand combat with people. This does not apply to any sort of range units. Basically, this determines your probability that you're going to be able to hit somebody. So the baseline chance, if the attacker has the same melee attack as the defender has melee defense, is going to be a 45% chance that you're going to hit somebody. Okay? And then every point of melee attack higher than melee defense, it goes up 1% for your chance to hit. Versus every melee defense that's higher than your melee attack is going to be 1% less chance to hit. And that goes to a cap, I believe, of an 85% chance to hit and a low cap of a 15% chance to hit. So if we look at this Phoenix, right? If this Phoenix was attacking itself, it has 42 melee attack, 30 melee defense, okay? It has 12 more melee attack than it has melee defense. So you take your baseline number of 45, 12 over. So you're going to add 45 plus 12, 57. So that means that this champion attacking itself would have a 47% chance to land a hit. All right, so it rolls for chance before it does anything else. That's another layer of defense that you have to cut through. So something up here. Now, this doesn't have very high defense, though. It only has 30 defense. So if this guy was attacking, this guy with 42 defense, or 42 melee attack, rather, was attacking this person with 30 defense, that's 12 over. Once again, so they would have a 57% chance to hit them. After you decide whether it's going to hit them, so after it says, okay, we're going to hit them, then it starts looking at all this other stuff, right? Then it starts looking at armor, physical resist, ward save, all of that stuff. But it checks the melee attack and the melee defense first. Once again, this only applies to melee, so this does not matter ranged at all. Someone can have like 100 melee defense, and they're still going to get hit by every arrow, right, if they don't have a shield. So the shield is what determines if a ranged attack hits them, what the probability of that is. The melee attack is just for melee. And it just determines if the person's going to get hit, and then it figures out all of the damage after that. So that's how that works. And then there are lots of things that can buff melee attack and buff melee defense. However, like I said before, you can't go over, I believe, 85 is the upper limit and 15 is the lower. So if it's somebody who has 40 more melee attack than defense, than the enemy's defense, so if someone has a melee defense of 30, the attacker has a melee attack of 70, that's going to be the cap, because that's going to be 40 over. And then that means that you're going to be reaching that 85% chance to hit cap. So that means if someone has 90 melee attack or 100 melee attack against someone who has 30 melee defense, they're not getting any benefit beyond 70, because getting that extra plus 40 is the maximum amount. Similarly, with the 15% lower, you only get a benefit of having 30 more melee attack or 30 more melee defense than their melee attack on the defensive side. So if somebody has, let's say, 30 melee attack, they're attacking somebody with 60 melee defense, then they're only going to have a 15% chance to hit. It's going to go 45 minus 30, it's down to 15. Then no other melee defense is going to matter, right? So if you had 30 melee attack attacking 80 melee defense, it's still going to be a 15% chance to hit, okay? So they don't make it, it's not ever impossible to hit them. No one's ever fully immune. It's, in general, much more common for people to have way higher melee attack than they have melee defense. There are only a handful of units in the game that have, like, over 60 melee defense. Very, very few. It's usually, like, dwarf units. There are a couple of defensive units in there, but there aren't many. Okay, so that's melee attack, melee defense. Weapon strength, we talked about before. The main thing that you want to notice here is how much armor piercing does it have. So you've got your weapon strength there, your base damage, that gets blocked by armor. Armor piercing damage always goes through armor, but it's still reduced by physical resist, right? And And then you just want to look at any other things. Does it have fire damage? Does it have magical damage? One thing to note is, does it get a bonus against certain types of units? So if we look at something like Sword Masters of Hoeth here, they get a bonus versus infantry of 14. So what that means is if they're attacking another infantry unit, they're going to get 14 more melee attack, and they're going to get 14 more armor-piercing damage. So they're going to go up to 60 melee attack, and then they're going to go up to 50 damage. So they are very, very effective against other melee champions, or against other infantry units, right? Versus if you look at halberd units and spears, you would suspect they're good against large units, right? And in fact, they are. If they have this little icon here, they get a 20 bonus versus large. That means their melee attack would go up to 58, and their weapon strength would go up to 56 if they're facing a large unit. Now, sometimes it's obvious if it's a large unit. If it's something on a horse, it's a large unit. Usually, if it's something that's like a human-sized person on the ground, then it's going to be considered infantry. But you can always look at this little icon here, and it'll tell you entity size. So if it's like this small-looking thing here, it's going to be small. If it's a large-looking thing like this, then it's going to be large. So that's how you can determine which penalties and which bonuses are going to apply. So some things can get a little weird, like the eagle, even though it's not that huge, it still counts as large, right? So you can kind of look at the entity sizes and see. And that's another thing to keep in mind too, is the entity sizes on some of these things, right? So this has 100 units in this battalion. Now, there are strengths and weaknesses to having small or large entity sizes. This many entity sizes means that, in theory, there's 100 units that all do this amount of damage. So there could be 100 units that do 34 damage each. The maximum damage output of this would be, 3,400 per round of combat, right? Depending on their attack speed, which is not listed here. I'm not going to go too far into that. You don't need to know it when you're first learning the game. But generally, what you would expect, things that are like Berserker type of units are going to attack a lot faster. Things that are, typically very large, like heavily armored, slow swinging things are going to attack a lot slower. So like halberds are going to attack a lot slower than things like, Marauder Berserkers or something like that for Norska. Okay, you can Google it and figure out the attack speed if you want out there, on some websites, but it's not something that they mention here. And it's usually pretty standardized. Most stuff has very similar attack speeds, except for stuff like Berserkers. Okay. But yeah, so that has a lot of potential damage. If we look at that number, right? So that has a lot of potential damage. But you got to remember, all of these people aren't going to be attacking all the time. When you see a lot of these melee lines, they'll get clumped up. Some people will be hanging out on the back line, not attacking. You might only have 50% of your people attacking at one time. As they start taking damage, some of them are going to die, right? So when there's only 50 people left in this battalion, then they're going to be doing a lot less damage because there's just less people that are going to be hitting. So as combat drags on, they're going to be doing a lot less damage, and just because of the surface area, depending on how the fight's going, they're not going to be able to reach that potential damage. Versus something like a dragon is a single entity unit, there's only one of them, they're always going to do that damage. And a lot of times, these very large things have wide sweeping attacks. It doesn't tell you that in this game. It tells you a little bit more in the Steel Faith Overhaul mod. But basically, this is not just attacking one unit most of the time. It's going to be like hitting like 10 different units at once. And so large, monstrous things like this typically are going to be hitting a lot of units at once, like giants, even things like trolls, some of those monstrous infantry type of units, hydras, stuff like that are going to be hitting multiple units. And you can tell this by looking at them. If you watch them in combat, they'll do a swing and you'll see like 10 people go flying or something like that. So they do a lot more damage than it seems like this would imply. So 580 is like, why would I ever get a dragon that does 580 when I can get this, battalion of these white lions that are going to put up like, 3,400 damage per hit? It's like, well, because this dragon's going to be hitting multiple targets and he always does full damage. If you have 7,000 damage on this dragon and he doesn't run away, he's still doing full damage regardless. Versus, if these people are missing 80% of their soldiers, then they're doing 80% less damage. So that's kind of the strength and benefit. You do want to have some infantry lines that have large stacks like this, that have 100. You don't want to run like all dragons. But at the same time, it is nice to have some of these that always do full damage. One thing to keep in mind as well is surface area. If like a unit of 100 of these things attacks this dragon, all 100 of them are not going to be able to fit around the dragon at the same time, right? There might be 20 of them that are surrounding the dragon attacking it, and the other 80 people are going to be sitting there watching. So that is another thing to keep in mind, is if you take advantage of that surface area, some of these large units can be very powerful in that sense. Now, units like halberds, most units have a range of 1, which means like the units on the front line are attacking, the people on the back line are not attacking. Right? But halberds, spears don't have this, I don't think most of the time, but halberds do. So like these Phoenix Guard halberd infantry have a range of 2, which means the back line does attack. So they actually do double damage. So it looks like they're only doing, 56 damage to large, but because the back row can also attack because the halberds are really long, then they're actually effectively doing basically double damage what someone like these white lions would do, who are only going to have the front row attacking. So that's another kind of under-the-table stat that they don't really tell you here that makes halberds super, super strong against large units. So just keep that in mind. And you can find the range of units as well. I should have looked up the website where you can do this, but you can look this up. Just look up, like, I think it's like Old World Wiki or something like that. Total War Warhammer Old World Wiki. And it tells you the New World stuff too. They've updated it, but it was just initially called Old World Wiki. And it'll tell you some of these like secret stats that Creative Assembly doesn't tell you. So it tells you things like attack speed, it tells you things like range and stuff like that. It's pretty advanced. You don't usually need to know it. I mean, it's just like common sense will get you there, right? It's like, okay, large unit, halberds, it's going to be good. Okay, it's just like, how good is it mathematically? Well, you have to go like figure out, their swing rate and things like that. But in the base game, in the first game, halberds were pretty terrible against other infantry units because they had a super slow attack swing, but they've normalized that. Because that was something that a lot of beginner people didn't realize. Why are my halberds getting destroyed by swords like so hard? That was why. So halberds still aren't the most amazing against swords, but it's not quite as bad as it used to be. Okay, so that's the weapon damage, weapon types, thinking about unit entities, how that works. Now, charge bonus is another one that's a little weird and difficult to understand. Basically, if you run at a unit, if you're attacking them full on, you get 10 seconds of additional bonus after you hit them. And that bonus comes in the form of additional melee attack and additional melee strength. Now, they've changed this over time. I think this might sort of fall off a little bit. I don't know if it stays at the full value for the entire 10 seconds. But in general, you get a bonus. So if you attack with Phoenix Guard, you get an extra 10 melee attack and 10 weapon strength for 10 seconds, roughly, right? So it might fall off a little bit. I don't remember the exact math, but basically your initial hit and for a little bit after you charge somebody is going to be powerful, okay? Now, some units are going to be way better at charge bonus than others. And it's the exact units you would think are very good. Huge monsters and horses are going to hit really hard. So if we look at something like the Sun Dragon here, it has a charge bonus of 65. So if you attack somebody with this, they're going to get an extra 65 melee attack, which is going to give them 111 melee attacks. They're getting that 85% on pretty much everybody at that point for 10 seconds. And they get an extra 65 weapon strength. Now, there's also collision damage, which it doesn't tell you here, and it depends on how much the enemy unit weighs, how much your unit weighs, all that kind of stuff. But you can tell, like, heavily armored big units, when they charge into somebody, units are going to go flying, and it does huge damage to those units. So it does impact damage. I think it does whatever their weapon strength is as impact damage initially when you charge into somebody. So it does a lot of damage. You'll see their health bar go down a lot if you have something like Dragon Knights charge into archers or something like that, right? Because these things are not going to weigh very much at all. They're going to be paper, and these are super heavily armored, and they're just going to run them over. So it depends on how much momentum you have on the charge. If you're charging downhill, physics do matter. Then it'll knock them even harder. Versus if it's lightly armored cav, if it's like these Illyrian Reavers trying to charge into something that's heavily armored like Phoenix Guard Halberd, these guys are going to move a little bit, but not very much. And some units, particularly Spears and Halberd, they'll have something called Expert Charge Defense. So that means if you're standing perfectly still and they charge into you, they do not get that bonus. Okay? You're still going to fly a little bit. Okay? So the impact damage does happen, but you don't get the extra, they won't get the extra melee attack and weapon strength off of that. So it is to your benefit if you think you're going to get charged to try to take that charge with a spear unit or a halberd unit that has the charge defense icon down here. Charge defense versus large. Okay? So they're going to take the impact damage, but it's going to be a lot less bad for you in terms of getting Sadie. In terms of getting the weapon strength and all that kind of stuff. Now, there's a strategy to this as well where you want to have different charge, they call that charge cycling. So if you charge in with your Star Dragon, do your first impact damage, attack for 10 seconds or so, and then run out of the battle again for a second, turn around, charge back in, you're going to get that bonus again. So sometimes shock cavalry like this are good for that. So you want them to charge in, get that initial bonus for 10 seconds, and then if you can, run them back out, form up again, and then charge in again for an additional 10 seconds. Because usually these shock cavalry do not have very good melee attack and defense. So these numbers are really low. It's only 36-30, so if you just stand them in combat against, a lot of other units, they're probably going to get beaten up. I mean, 36-30, even sort of these like mid-range units are probably going to trash them, right? So 36-24, but these have a lot more armor piercing damage. So, they're going to be able to beat them up. So you have to pull these things out of combat and then charge them back in there a lot of times. Versus something like Swordmasters of Hoeth, they have pretty decent charge bonus, but they have a really good, they're kind of slow, so it's going to be hard to run them out of combat to begin with. And then also, they already have a really good bonus versus infantry. And so you don't really want to charge cycle these guys. You don't want to run them out of combat and back in because it's not worth it. Versus these are pretty fast. So you can very easily get them back out and then charge them back in. Same thing with dragons. Dragons are fast and they're big. So they're not going to get tied up in combat. A bunch of swordsmen aren't going to be able to hold that dragon down and stop it from going back out. Flying units in particular are also really strong because they always get to land their charge first. So even if, there's dragon princes on the ground and there's a dragon on top, the star dragon is going to get his charge bonus on the dragon princes. Dragon princes aren't going to get it because they can't attack it because it's flying unless it's already on the ground. And so that makes flying units really, really strong because they always get their bonus against anybody and they negate other people's charge bonus on that initial hit. And you can flank around and hit them from the back to get that bonus leadership penalty on the enemy that we mentioned before. So flying units are extremely powerful, as you would expect. Okay, so that's charge bonus. I think we've covered pretty much all of the stats. That's probably a little bit more advanced than a lot of people would want to know, but I just throw it all out there since it's there to begin with. Damn, this video is going to be 2 hours if I cover everything I wanted to cover. Let's just go through the units here, and I might make a second video or something like that that covers combat and things like that. But let's just go through some of these units based on what we mentioned, what we talked about the stats, and what are going to be the really efficient units for High Elves and what you want to look for in these stats. Okay, so, first of all, you want to look at any sort of natural bonuses that you get. So Tyrion's going to get that bonus. Where is he over here? So the minus 50% upkeep for spearmen, archers, and silver helms. So that's the first thing you want to look at is, do you have any bonuses for certain types of units? Do you have any upkeep reduction, extra melee attack, defense, all that kind of stuff? So we want to be getting a lot of spearmen, archers, and silver helms if we can, just because those are going to be really cheap. Right, so if we look at this, now this tells you how much they cost before they're actually in your army. So 118 for archers there. If we look here, it's actually 71. So you get that 50% bonus. You might say, well, why isn't it the full 50%? Each army that you have is going to cost you a little bit extra in terms of upkeep. Now, I have this on Legendary when I pulled this up, so on lower difficulty levels, you're not going to get that much of a penalty. But you can see that it does not include any cost reductions that you have right here. That's calculated after you buy the unit. So yeah, so that means these are going to be very efficient, very cheap. Another thing to look at also is to look at the skills. I guess we can look at that really quickly and kind of plan ahead which units are going to get the large bonuses. So you want to look at your Legendary Lord, but you also want to look at your skill tree and your tech tree, which we can look at in a second, and try to figure out what's the best bang for your buck, right? What's the most cost-efficient, powerful unit you can get early on, or units that you can get. And think about it that way. Because sometimes there will be some units that are just like, okay, but you might have some crazy bonus to them somewhere on your Legendary Lord. So like, for example, Queek gets a lot of bonuses to his, what are they called? Kind of his elite infantry for the Skaven, the Storm Vermin. He gets all these bonuses for them. And so, like, the Storm Vermin won't be as good with Skrulk because he doesn't get the bonuses, but they're great for Queek. And similarly with Skrulk, he gets a lot of bonuses to their Berserker units. But so you would want to get a lot of the Berserker units with Skrulk because he gets bonuses to them, right? So you just kind of want to look at your Legendary Lord and see what they get the bonuses to. So he gets a lot of bonuses to early spears and bows. So we want to get stuff for spears and bows. Hey, thanks for the sub. I appreciate it, Vin. So almost always when you're doing your skill tree, you want to start with the red tree. The extra 5 leadership is a really big deal. That gives pretty much anyone that's close to your Lord an extra 5 leadership. And then you want to get something that beefs up your early tier units. And the reason is that, like, these numbers mean a lot more on early units than they do on later units. So extra 8 melee attack. This is just insane. Like, this is so strong. Combined elites is ridiculously powerful. But a lot of factions will have something along the lines of your baseline infantry are going to get extra melee attack and defense. And it's super strong because they have 8 melee attack early and 8 melee defense. If we look at these numbers, these are already really low. They only have 20 melee attack and 38 melee defense. So getting 8 extra melee attack is huge. That's like 40% extra, like, melee attack early on. Versus if you get 8 melee attack on something like, I don't know. It's still really good on Swordmasters, just to be clear. But they also have 46 base. So it's still good. But, like, as far as, like, how much of a power spike is that, it's not as much as it is for these guys because they're starting from such a low base. So you want to find your units that are really cheap, that you can increase their base by a significant amount, and then that makes them really, really cost efficient. So if we look at something like Swordmasters here, combined elites, we get 8 for Spearmen, Archers, and Sea Guard. Okay, those are the 2 units that he gets huge benefits for. He gets a 50% reduction for Spears and Archers. That's great. And then he gets the 3 Chevrons for Sea Guard later on, right? If you want those, he gets those extra ranks. Remember, that gives them extra melee attack and defense and all that stuff. It also gives 12% extra damage for Illyrian Reavers. Those units are okay. You don't necessarily want to get a lot of them, but I mean, why not? You get it in addition. Like, just having the 8 melee attack and defense for your entry-level units, that's already really strong. The extra stuff is just bonus. So getting the extra speed for Reavers and Silverhelms, he does get a discount on Silverhelms too, so that's really good. And then the charge bonus for Silverhelms, a plus 12. Super, super strong. Now, another thing to look at here is Bowmaster, right? So your Archers, your Sea Guard, and then your high tier units too, including your Sisters of Avalorn and your artillery are all wrapped up in this as well. So this is going to be super strong, right? So the extra ammo is very good for longer fights, and the reload reduction just means how fast they're going to fire. It's weird how they tell you the reload reduction stat, but they don't tell you your, like, melee attack speed stat or interact with that at all to make people attack faster or whatever. But anyways, that is good information. So I would say that this is super important to get. This would have me definitely looking at Spearmen and Archers early on, just because I'm getting the 50% cost reduction now, and I'm getting extra melee attack and extra melee defense That's really strong. This is another thing to consider if you're wanting to get a lot more archers, because it starts with the early stuff, which is good, the normal archers. It transitions into the mid-game with the Lothern, and then for your top-end units, your Sister of Avalorn and your bolt throwers, it also has a bonus there. So it has a really nice sort of curve to it. Versus something like this, 12% extra damage for Eagles, Phoenixes, and Dragon units. It's okay, right? But percentage damage is not as strong as melee attack most of the time if you think about it. Because remember, that 8 extra melee attack is going to mean that you're going to hit effectively like 40% more of your swings, because you start off with 20 melee attack. So that's basically like 40% extra damage that you're getting, versus this is 12% extra damage that you're getting. So they're different stats, but if you think about it in that way, weapon strength is a really weak stat most of the time. And this is what they'll give to large monsters typically, like big units. They'll have them do extra weapon strength instead of melee attack, because giving them a lot of melee attack would make them probably really overpowered. And the charge bonus is okay, but they're already going to have huge charge bonuses. Now, this is very good later on in the game. This is for your elite units. The 8/8 here on Sword Masters, White Lions, and Phoenix Guard. Very, very strong. But you're not going to be able to afford a lot of those, or even recruit a lot of those early on. And then this is okay. The fact that it gives 8 extra melee attack on Dragon Princes is good, but remember, you're going to be charging with them a lot too, right? You're going to be charge cycling with them, so you're already going to be at the cap. You're going to be getting plus 65 melee attack for 10 seconds every time you charge. And so the melee attack is not as important on them, because they're not going to be sitting in combat the whole time. They're always going to have that bonus. So that's okay. So yeah, I would definitely start with Inspiring Presence, Combined Elites. Consider Bowmaster, maybe, depending on how the fights are going. And then over here is usually every faction is going to have this. Pretty self-explanatory. When you get to 7 ranks on certain types of units, you get different bonuses. So, you know, you can check out what these bonuses are, but it's almost always worth putting 1 point in there once you start getting several units in your army that are rank 7. So early on, that can help you consider, you know, which units you want to get. You also want to look at your techs for each faction and just see what's something early on you can get that's going to give you extra bonuses. Remember, we're looking for early tier units, like anything that gives melee attack, melee defense, cost reduction. All that stuff's going to be very strong. So if you look here at this early unit, Spear Wall. Okay, so extra weapon strength for Spearmen and Seaguard. Okay, pretty good. Leadership for Seaguard. Okay, maybe all right in the middle game. Illyrian Reavers, extra 10 armor. Okay, not that great. 15% reload for archers is tremendous. That's really, really good. And then a little bit of extra movement speed. Not a huge deal. Remember, these are only going to move at like 32 speed anyway, so you're going to be getting like 1 extra speed. So, not insanely amazing. Extra Lothar and Seaguard stuff. And then recruit rank for Spearmen and Archers. This is going to be really strong, so that's going to give you 2 extra recruit, which will give you, I don't remember how much it is on Spearmen, but it will probably give you somewhere close to like 4 extra melee attack or so, and some extra defense, and maybe like, you know, 4 melee attack, 2 defense, and 2 leadership or something. I don't remember the exact number is. It's something like that. Then if you look over here at some advanced stuff, this is extra ammo and missile damage. So remember that thing that we saw in the skill tree that gave 20% extra ammo to all of that stuff and extra missile damage? Well, now you can get this too. So they'll have 40% extra ammo and 20% extra missile damage. And then this over here, that's weapon strength. That's reload reduction for archers. So now these are 4 different things that affect archers. You have that skill, which gives them extra ammo reload reduction. This gives them extra ammo reload reduction. This gives them extra ammo reload reduction, and you get 50% off. So archers are looking pretty damn good right now in terms of cost efficiency overall. Extra armor for all of your entry-level stuff, that's going to be very strong. And then, you know, melee attack for those types of units is not going to be that great. It's all right, but cost reduction, that's all looking good. Cost reduction for Seaguard are great, and cost reduction for Spearmen. So I would say early on, if you can get Military Advancement 1 and Military Advancement 2, okay, so that requires Wizards, which you're definitely going to get. And this just, Military Advancement 1 just requires you to get this building, Rally Field, which you definitely want to get early. So it looks like If it'll let me hover this or not. There we go. Archers. It looks like your best bet here are going to be to go for these light armor archers. They're going to be a little bit more expensive early on, but having the extra armor is a big deal. They don't have, I guess in the Steel Faith overhaul, they have the heavy head archers or whatever that do more armor piercing damage, but this is going to make them really strong. So you get all those other bonuses. They're going to be very, very cheap after everything. Going to have a ton of extra ammo, and they're going to fire really fast, and they're going to have 40 armor. So those archers will destroy these other entry-level archers because they're going to have a lot more armor. Then you can eventually go up to the Lothern Sea Guard with the shields. So that's going to give you not only the armor, but the silver shields. They're going to do similar damage. They're going to have less ammo, but with the Sea Guard, they also double as a spear infantry. So they get 16 versus large. So if they get flanked by cavalry or something like that in the late game, they can actually do pretty well against them. So they have pretty good melee defense and pretty good cavalry defense. So the Sea Guard are more expensive. They're 212. You also don't get the discount on them. So these are going to end up costing you like 60 gold or something like that. And these are going to cost you, 212. So I wouldn't go all out Sea Guard, but maybe get a couple of Sea Guard to protect your flanks just in case cavalry come in. So you can still have a lot of archers, but still have that protection on the flanks. And just maybe use some of these as your cheaper filler units. That's probably where I would start early. You can go get Silver Helms if you want in some secondary towns. You do get 50% off on these. They are really nice, sort of entry-level cav. They're going to smash a lot of the Dark Elf cav early on, or those Dark Rider type of units. They have a much larger charge bonus, way more armor, and pretty good melee attack and defense. And the fact that you get 50% off is going to be really, really nice. You can use the Illyrian Reavers as sort of your very early, like, super cheap skirmisher cav. They're good for going around and just, like, attacking and harassing archers or artillery or things like that. They're going to have a harder time if they stay in combat against spears or something like that. So, and they don't weigh as much. Their charge bonus is not going to be as heavy as the Silver Helms, but they're pretty decent little starter units. And then eventually you want to transition up. If you can. I like getting these guys are really good. These are a great bargain. They're 200, so they're a little bit more expensive, but they have very nice armor compared to some of the spears over there, and they have really heavy armor-piercing damage. So if you're going against stuff that's going to be really heavily armored, then this can be pretty good. Like maybe some of the Tomb King units, like the Tomb Guard they have, or maybe some of the pirate units that are going to have a little bit of the heavier armor, like the Depth Guard, then these are going to be really good. Or some of the Dark Elf stuff, like particularly the, blanking out their name, the Blackheart Corsairs have a lot of armor, so these will crush Blackheart Corsairs. They're very, very good. And then having this Eagle is nice to get a tier 3 flying unit that you can go in and disrupt that backline, right? Particularly in sieges, you can get on top of that siege wall and just start tearing up some of the archers that are up there trying to defend. You can charge people in the back with a fear-causing unit, maybe causing them to break early on. They're just a very, very good support unit that's really cheap. So they don't have a lot of health, but they are super fast. They have a really good charge bonus if you run them in and out of combat a lot. But you don't want them to just stick there in combat for too long because they have 30 armor. So you got to be swift with them. It's going to take a little bit of micromanagement. But you can definitely make those work. So that would be the early game stuff that I would focus on. I'm going to end, I guess, with just maybe talking about some buildings and some magic really quickly. And then if people are interested in this, let me know, and then I can talk about the battlefield itself and how to, like, position and fight on the battlefield and stuff like that, some of those considerations, and maybe a shorter video. But I don't want this video to go too long. It's already super long, but I don't want it to be like a 2 or 3 hour video. I'm just trying to be as thorough as possible for, like, a complete beginner all in one video here. Like I said, I maybe should have broken this up into, like, several videos, but whatever. It is what it is. So I think that's an early game, like, good place to go is to just really focus on archers, spears, and then if you want to, you can transition into things like Silver Helms or like these knights. Knights line up very, very good against a lot of other tier 3 infantry out there, and the Eagles are a very good unit too. Although keep in mind, these don't progress into anything else. So you'd probably want to build this in like a tier 3 town where you don't need to upgrade it. Versus in your main town, that's going to be able to go up to tier 5. Your secondary towns can only go to tier 3. Your main town can go to tier 5. you might want to save that for, you know, stuff like this Shrine of Assyrian, where you can eventually get up to these halberds, or, you know, put your mage building in your main town so that you can upgrade and eventually get the Sword Masters of Hoeth, which are really strong. Okay. Eagle Claw bolt throwers are okay if you want to consider those. I wouldn't go with chariots. They're all right. They require a lot of micromanagement, and frankly, I don't think they're that much better than most cav. Like, I'd probably just stick with Silver Helms or Eagles as your flanker units. But that's worth considering. Okay, let's talk about magic here really quickly. And, you know, you'll need other stuff in your town, so you can kind of figure it out. Growth allows you to build up your town a little bit faster. You can see the growth down here, how long it's going to take you to get extra points. So you would want to go ahead and just probably upgrade this. It does start to give you some way fragments as you get your town upgraded. Is that... I wonder if it's that way for every town. Is it you get one per town? I forgot about that. Yeah, so you just want to get as many towns as you can then. This gives you a little bit of gold income. It gives you these elven trinkets, which you can trade when you get a lot of trade agreements with other people. So this is like super, well, not super, but a pretty good income generating building. And then public order is something down here. Basically, if you're running at the lower difficulties, you're not going to be getting a penalty for public order. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but you're going to need to get a little bit just to cover the taxes, the 4 tax rate. As you go up into Legendary, you're going to need to try to get to 8 public order, which gets harder. Means you're going to have more of these buildings in your towns to make that work. You can eventually get a hero like a Noble, who is pretty good. He's a decent fighter, gives you more casualty replenishment rate, can help secure influence, allows you to gain some more influence over time to get those good lords for a certain cost. So he's okay. But the main heroes you want to be going for. So just get these as needed. You could measure it out and figure it out. I think early on, getting the income building is almost always a really good idea. And then getting some growth is typically a pretty good plan too. So most of the time, if public order isn't a problem, I would say just drop a growth, drop an Elven Craftsman in your town. You know, get to a tier 2 town in most places, and that's probably good to go. If you need a recruitment building, you can get one of these, but... generally, you won't need that much. Another good benefit, speaking of that, as you expand and start going out more, if you upgrade all of your tier 1 units and really max them out with your skills and your techs and all that kind of stuff, then you can just drop a tier 1 unit and just buy some, like, you know, some cheap archers and some cheap spearmen if you're having to defend, you know, an outpost or something like that. And they're going to be really effective. You know, you can't just drop in a tier 4 and get some sword masters, right? On this new town, this tier 2 town you just took over that's like... you know, 200 miles from your capital, right? You'd have to hire stuff in your capital and run it all the way out there to try to defend. So if you heavily upgrade and invest in your early units, you can just drop an outpost up there in one turn, tier 1 town, and get some pretty decent fighters that can hold up against other units because you've upgraded them heavily. They're also cheaper. So you're really, really heavily incentivized to put most of your resources into upgrading your lower tier units, and then just sprinkle in some of these high tier units whenever you get a chance to in your upper level or in your more elite armies. And obviously, if you're super rich late game, you know, you can just buy like 8 sword masters and 4 dragons and a couple of dragon princes, you know, all of this crazy expensive stuff. But you've already won the game by that point, pretty much. You're just playing around. So you really just want to upgrade those early tier units if you want to, if you want to be efficient. Okay, magic, and that's the last thing I'll cover. And then if people want to see sort of, you know, talking about the live battle stuff, just let me know and we can do that as well. But let's look at magic here really quick. So you have a few different options. You can get Mage of Shadows, Mage of Heavens, Mage of Life, High Magic, and Light. All right, so let's look at those really quick. So the way that magic works, you want to try to get a wizard as fast as you possibly can in your armies because magic is extremely powerful. And fortunately, you can get it at tier 3 with high elves, which is really, really nice. A lot of other factions, you'll have to wait until tier 4 before you can start getting wizards. But with high elves, you can get them at tier 3, which is really good. So let's look at the magic tree up here really quickly, and I'll walk you through. The TLDR is life magic's going to be the most powerful one, but we'll go through some of the other ones and look at why. So basically, every fight, you're going to get so much like of this like mana. They call it something else. It's, you know, power cost, winds of magic. It's basically your mana, right? So you start with a certain amount at the start of the fight, like maybe 15 or something like that, and then over time that amount goes up. You have a power reserve, which will be a certain amount, and that power reserve feeds into your main amount of mana over time. So if you have 100 power reserve and you start with 15, it'll tell you you're going to get 1 extra mana added to your main pool from your reserve every 3 seconds or something like that. So over time, basically your power reserves filter into your main mana pool up to a certain limit. I think in the baseline game you can get up to 30 in your main pool, and then, you know, once you start spending it, then you can get that extra from your reserve. Once you run out of your reserve, you don't have any more magic. There are some things that can temporarily increase your reserve to give you a bit more magic and can increase how fast it filters from your reserve into your magic. But, you know, that's a little more advanced for this video. Pretty much all factions are going to have some things that can increase your power reserve on your wizards and can increase your regeneration rate. All of those are always going to be really strong. Usually it's called arcane power at the very end of the wizard skill tree. You're going to be able to get that. So always get that if you can. It's really strong. Use it pretty much every time it's off cooldown. But let's look at some of these spells. So what does that mean? That means that you want efficient spells. You want spells that are typically going to be somewhere in like the 5 to 10 range, if you can get them there. And you want spells that are going to be really high impact that affect multiple units. So we'll just start with the best one here and why I think this is the best one. Certainly for campaign, I would say even in multiplayer is a whole different beast. But I think that this is still going to be really strong in multiplayer, and I think it's almost guaranteed to be the best one. Probably in the game, it's really close to being the best in the game. Some of the Skaven magic is also really good. The Skaven spells of Plague are really good. But this is certainly the best for the High Elves, I think. So why is that? Okay, first of all, it's not listed here, but each one of these schools of magic is going to have a passive. So pretty much whenever you cast a certain type of spell, you're going to get a map-wide bonus. And the bonus for these guys is it heals everyone on the map. Now, on your side. Now, it doesn't heal them by an insane amount, but it does heal them a little bit. So you're going to get like 3 to 5 seconds of healing every time you cast something. So if you're casting all of these cheap spells, you're going to be getting all this extra healing. There are some other ones that are pretty good, like the War of Death, for example, for vampires. Whenever you cast a spell, you get more Winds of Magic regeneration, which is good. Like Shadows gives everyone on your team like a little bit of extra move speed for a certain amount of time, and just so on and so forth. You can read the passives, you know, as you get the different schools of magic. I wish it listed them here. It doesn't have them, but War of Life is one of the strongest ones because it just heals everybody over time. So, really handy. Okay, so when you're looking at the spells, the things, first of all, you want to look at the cost. Once again, you want stuff in the 5 to 10 range because that means you're going to be able to cast a lot of them multiple times throughout a fight, which is really good. Another thing you want to look at, and this is super important, is see if it has effect range. What this means is it's an area of effect this spell, right? And there aren't many. They've nerfed a lot of these over time. But if it's area of effect, that means it's going to hit multiple units. So if you cast this in the middle, excuse me, for example, in the middle of an infantry line, you might affect 3 of your allied infantry. So it's not going to heal one group. It can heal up to 3 different groups for 7 seconds. So it replenishes a pretty good chunk of hit points. I don't remember exactly how much it is. It's better on larger entity units, so like things that have like 100 units in it rather than a smaller entity unit, I believe. It doesn't resurrect people, so that's something to keep in mind. Like some of the vampire magic, the Nehikara or whatever thing that they have, what is that called? This Invocation of Nehek. That does resurrect people. So it not only heals them for 20 seconds, but it also resurrects them for 20 seconds. You'll notice it doesn't affect multiple people unless you upgrade it. So it costs 11, and then it affects multiple people within 30 range. So they nerfed that. It used to affect multiple, I believe, off the first tier. Maybe it never did, but that raises people from the dead and heals them. So this only heals them. So this is better against like heavily armored stuff, not trash units that are going to get like destroyed really quickly. So really good, lots of healing on everybody. If you upgrade it to 11, then it lasts for 14 seconds, so it can last a little bit longer. Okay, regeneration is also some of the strongest magic in the game because it works with your resistances. So for example, when you heal people, let's say you heal them for 200 health, they're going to have to cut through all of your armor, all of your melee attack, your physical resist, your shields, your missile resistance, all of this stuff. They're going to have to cut through all of that to deal that damage, right? So that means that, like, even though you're only healing 200, if you're effectively blocking, like, 50% of the damage that they would be doing to you through shields and armor and all that other stuff I just mentioned, that means you're effectively healing for 400, because they're going to have to spend 400 damage to counteract that 200 health that you just got. This is something I talk about in League of Legends all the time, why heals and shields are so strong. Anything that's defensive that benefits from your own resistances, your armor, all that other stuff, going to be very strong. Versus if you cast some of these offensive spells on units that have magic resistance, they're going to get that reduced a little bit. So that's just an extra benefit why these defensive things are usually really strong. Okay, then you have a standard Awakening of the Wood. So it doesn't do a ton of damage. It's okay. Does a little bit of damage, knocks some units back. It can slow them down. You know, if they're trying to charge at you with some really heavy cav, or maybe they have some really dangerous infantry that are walking towards you and you just want to be able to shoot them a little bit longer with your archers or something like that, you can slow them down. So that's really handy. And then this one's pretty good bang for your buck. It's 60 extra armor. Now, it only works on one unit, so it doesn't affect multiple units, but it lasts 44 seconds. That's light years. So if you put this on your big dragon that's just sitting there soaking all these hits, or your lord, you know, let's say that you throw Tyrion in the middle of a bunch of people, you drop this armor on him, it's going to be very, very strong. So obviously you don't want to do this if your unit's getting hit by things that are doing heavy armor-piercing damage. But against stuff that's not doing armor-piercing damage, you know, that can be very strong. So you can even make it up to 88 seconds for 11. So pretty good bang for your buck unit. Once again, it's in that nice sweet spot of 5 to 10 to get a good benefit. Now, this is just overpowered as hell. This is really, really strong. I'm pretty sure in Steel Faith Overhaul, they made it into missile resistance rather than physical resistance. But this is ridiculous. Like, I can't explain how overpowered this is. So, 22 seconds, area of effect, gives everybody plus 25% weapon damage and 22% physical resistance. For 8 Winds of Magic. That's ridiculous. Everyone loves this. This, like, you just throw this on anybody who's in melee combat and they're gonna love it. It's so good. This is good against armor-piercing damage, AP damage, right? Because it's physical resistance. It's not armor. It's even 40 range instead of 30, so it affects even more units. So you just drop this every time it's off cooldown. You want to throw this on your infantry line. You can even take it up to 50% extra weapon damage if you upgrade it. I don't know if that's worth it all the time. It could be if it's on really elite units like your sword masters, but still, it's really strong. Now, it does have a pretty strong long cooldown, but if you put a lot of points into this, which you should, you can probably get the cost down to like 6, and you can lower the cooldown to like 22 seconds. So, extremely powerful, overpowered, really overpowered. Okay, Regrowth. This is another one. It's a bit more on the expensive side. It's 13, so this is an elite spell, but it heals a lot. It's 29 seconds of healing. So this is awesome to put on your dragon, put on your lord, Tyrion, whatever. It's going to heal them up for a ton, and it gives them 100% extra vigor. This is new. This used to give, I believe, physical resistance for the duration, which was really good too, but like, I guess they put the physical resist over here. But the 100% vigor is massive. We didn't talk about vigor that much. It's a stat in combat that I'll talk about more in the combat video. But basically, the more vigor your units have, that's like their endurance. They're going to hit more in combat. They're going to be able to defend better. They're going to move faster. They're going to deal more damage. They're going to have more armor. As your units get tired, it kind of makes sense. They start to drop their shield a little bit, you know. They can't swing their weapons quite as fast. They're going to be walking a lot more slowly. So all of it makes sense in terms of physics. It just doesn't spell out that stat for you. But vigor is really, really strong. So replenishing full vigor on somebody, like halfway through a battle when they're really tired, is amazing. That's just going to give them so much extra melee attack, melee defense, move speed, armor, all of this stuff. So super underrated stat, vigor. So the fact that it gives you 100% vigor and basically heals you up for like half your health is sick. It's really, really good. Now, I don't know how to quantify that. It says it gives you a lot of extra replenishment. I don't know, but it's probably good. For 4 extra at that point, it's probably a pretty good investment. And then finally, this is one of the best direct damage spells in the game, Vortex. Now, a lot of these Vortex spells are usually pretty bad because they're randomly moving. You'll see this with other schools of magic where they'll just run around in a random direction. The reason that's bad, obviously, is because it can come back into your own units. You know, you could cast a banishment vortex from the War of Light, for example, and it could run back into your own units and just destroy your own infantry line, which is obviously terrible. Now, this stands still, though. It's stationary. You put it on the units you want to put it on, and it's just going to completely wreck them. It does a ton of damage. It is massive, too. You can, like, wipe out their entire infantry line with this, especially in a siege when everyone's all balled up around the portcullis. You can just drop this on them, and I guess maybe like the gate or whatever. I don't know. I think a portcullis might be specifically over a moat, but whatever. You can just drop this around the gate where everyone's all clumped up. It's just going to massacre them. Or if, you know, they have an infantry line and you have them all like contained in this little circle and you drop this on them, it's just going to delete them. So it does a ton of damage. Causes severe damage. When it uses the word severe, that's a lot of damage. It doesn't tell you how much damage spells do, which is really annoying. There are other YouTube videos out there that explain how much damage spells do. That's beyond the scope of this video, but it's very, very strong. Okay, so I would take War of Life basically every time. I'll just go through some of the other ones really quickly and just show you why they're not as good as War of Life. So War of Heavens is okay. You know, 6 mana, 26 melee attack, 26 defense. This is good, you know, for a single unit though. Remember, you can't put this on anybody else, right? And keep in mind also with your spells, with most schools of magic, you're only going to be casting spells from 2 or 3 of your spells maybe. So it doesn't matter if you have a couple of trash spells that you never use, as long as you have 2 or 3 really good spells, because you're not going to have enough mana to cast every single spell on cooldown, right? You're going to have to be strategic. Now, War of Life just happens to have almost everything as an all-star in different situations, but realistically, you're probably going to be spamming just Earthblood and Shield of Thorns pretty much all the time. This is very situational. If something's face tanking a lot of damage, this is early game. You probably won't use it late game at all. This is really nice to cast like maybe once later on in a fight or so, and this is situational. You know, it does cost 18, but that can give you some options. You know, but you don't have to cast all the time. So it's a lot of situational stuff and just a lot of spamming Earthblood and Shield of Thorns probably. Now this, pretty decent, you know, but it's only a single unit. This is a decent casting breath spell. Breath spells are very good because you can aim those. But realistically, it's not going to do that much damage. It's nice. It's cute. It's okay. This, once again, it's okay. It has a very small strike area though. So War of Heavens is one of the better options that they give you. It's still not going to be that great, though. Not going to do a ton of damage. Midnight Wind is pretty good. I think they've nerfed this over time, but it's decent, right? Now, this is an AoE spell. It does last 25 seconds. It reduces the armor on the enemies by 30, and it reduces their melee attack by 26. I think it used to reduce their melee defense. I'm not sure, but it's okay. I mean, this is probably the best spell they have that you would be spamming a lot of. So this is their one really good spell, and they have a couple of, like, incidental spells that are all right. This is okay. It does pretty good damage. It doesn't do as much as you would suspect, though. It's decent. It looks really cool, but it's on a long cooldown, does a lot of damage. And then this is your randomly moving large area. This is like a holdover from the first game. This is how all their Vortex spells were. Then they added in things like Dwellers from Below and the Shadows one, which we'll talk about here in a second. But see how it's just randomly moving? You're just going to get a lot of wasted time, and it potentially could come back and kill your own units. That's really bad. So they have a lot of damage spells and just like very few utility spells, and the damage is not that high. Okay. War of Shadows. Now this one's okay that you can get. This does like decent damage, not much though, just kind of dinky damage, kind of like that one War of Life one. Your early level stuff is okay. Minus melee attack and defense is okay, but it only affects 1 unit, so it's all right. Withering, pretty weak, only affects 1 unit, minus 30, minus 8 leadership. For 14, you can have it affect multiple units, but it's not that much. Only -8 leadership. I mean, it's okay. It's not amazing, though. This is pretty good, but it's really expensive. So it's got a really small hitbox. It's a wind spell. Does some decent damage. It's okay. Now, these are very good, okay? So if you upgrade this to 20, this does 40% armor piercing damage and 40% normal damage to everybody for 28 seconds. Now, keep in mind that the other one could do 50% total weapon damage and give you 25% physical resistance for the same duration for like 11 magic instead of 18 from War of Life. Now, that doesn't beef up the... this also gives magical damage, which cuts through physical resistance and stuff like that. So it's good, but it's just so expensive for 18 when there's something with War of Life that's like similar, which also gives a defensive stat in addition to offense for way, way cheaper. So this is good. It's just so expensive. And then this is pretty good as well. So you get a huge vortex. It stands still, just like the Dwellers from Below. 13 is really cheap for a vortex spell. This is really strong. This is one of the most powerful vortex spells in the game. So it's good. You can upgrade it to do even more damage if you want. It also disrupts unit formation. So as you can see, everyone just starts flying around. So it pretty much disables them. It makes it impossible for them to run out of it. It is very strong. The problem with this school of magic, though, is they have a couple of really nice heavy hitter, very expensive spells on long cooldowns, but they have very, very limited utility. Nothing defensive, really. Once again, it's okay. Not amazing. War of High Magic is another one. It's got a lot of cheap stuff that's good. I mean, 26 extra melee attack or reload skill, which is going to allow certain units to fire faster, is good. It lasts 29 seconds. It only costs 4. Very good spammable spell, right? This is decent. This does regenerate people for 10 seconds. It does cause fear. So this can be very handy, especially against, you know, units that have really low leadership. That can be pretty useful. So it's okay. Once again, only single target, though. Can affect multiples. It does have 600 range, which is huge. You can throw this across, like, the whole map for that cost. So that's pretty decent. Soul Quench, okay. Magical missiles are pretty bad in general. Like, you can snipe out their lord, maybe. It can be blocked by trees. It can be blocked by hills. If you have, like, a flying lord and it's, like, multiplayer or something like that, magic missiles can be really strong. But in general, magic missiles are some of the weakest spell types for campaign. Tempest, pretty good at blasting dragons, you know. It's all right. They can fly out of it. They're going to be fast. It does slow them down a little bit. It's all right. Fiery Convocation, pretty good wind spell. Very expensive. It's 15. But does do pretty good damage. Has a really cool looking animation. Lots of wind up. They can move during that time. You know, it's all right. And then Arcane Unforgiving is just like direct damage. Which is okay, but it's like super expensive. So pretty good. I mean, they have good utility spells, you know, here and here. It's just not gonna hang with Life. Life just has way too much good stuff. This is so cheap, so powerful. That's overpowered as hell. Like, Flesh to Stone, strong. That's strong. Like, it's gonna be way better. And I don't remember what the... Oh, it was Light is the last one. Light is just a huge pile of garbage. Light is really bad for campaign. You can turn this into AoE for 10, which is expensive, to give you 27 melee attack and armor. It's okay. This is a... used to be, at one point in time, a really overpowered spell for multiplayer. They've nerfed the damage on it quite a lot. This was really, really good in multiplayer, like, a couple of years ago. Make your unit unbreakable. Unbreakable means they never run from combat no matter what. It only lasts 22 seconds. It's okay. I mean, not really. It's pretty bad. Net of Amantok is good. Once again, this is a multiplayer special. It holds people still so that they can't run anywhere, and you can just gun them down, you know, with your archer units. That's pretty decent. For 18, you can make it AoE. It used to be AoE standard, Once again, they nerfed it because of multiplayer. But really not going to be that strong most of the time. Barona's Time Warp, AoE, pretty decent. Move speed is not something that gets leveraged that much in combat. 26 melee attack is decent. It does last 50 seconds. And then Banishment's terrible. It's a randomly moving vortex spell that can kill your own units or just run away and do nothing. So, pretty bad. So I would say Lore of Life is probably the best one out there. High Magic is okay. It's respectable to an extent. Shadows is respectable, but Lore of Life is going to be your best one. And that's going to be it. It's already a 2-hour video. I really wanted to try to give Lucas bang for his buck here. I know he's been patient with me a few days while I was setting up for my classes at the university to get this guide done, so I appreciate that. But yeah, just let me know out there if you're interested in this content. If you have a guide out there that you would like to see, just let me know. I will, like I said, maybe do a like a battle guide if people want to see that, or if someone wants to donate for that. I can do a battle guide, or if there's something else you wanted to know more about, you want me to go look up some of those obscure stats and do a quick video on that, like 15 to 20 minutes about like melee attack speed and range and things like that. Or if there's a certain faction you wanted me to do a guide for, like do a full-on guide for Skaven, or do a full-on guide for, I do have a Skaven guide on the channel. Do a full-on guide for Empire or Dwarfs or whatever. I'm more than happy to do that for you. And usually most guides will probably be about an hour long. This was just a 2-hour special because I think a lot of people out there want to know this beginner stuff, and I was trying to be as thorough as possible. So just let me know if you have an idea what you'd like to see. Be sure to check out the campaigns on the channel. I have a ton of legendary campaigns, probably have like 50 or something on the channel, multiples for many races. I'm constantly doing more, so be sure to check those out. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day.